On this week's episode, I'm joined by Tamer Kattan, an international comedian, born in Egypt, raised in the US, and a human loophole with a Jewish mom and an Arab father. But he has a home and his heart right here in Portugal. We discuss, amongst other things, why he chose Portugal, Spanish prisons, Portuguese strangers in his mother's apartment, and the real reason why Portugal is so slippery. Be warned, there is some adult humor and strong language in this episode. For those of you listening, head over to our YouTube channel to watch the video edition of this episode. And for those of you watching, click down below and subscribe. And now, over to my conversation with Tamer Kattan. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life. And I'm really, really excited to be joined here by Tamer, Hammer with a T, Tamer Kattan. Tamer, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
You are very, very welcome. Thank you for being here. I've listened to a lot of your stuff on Instagram, and you are probably the only guest on the podcast that's made me cry, but crying from laughter. Okay,
oh, that's awesome. That's nice to hear. Thanks, man. Tell
us where you are. This looks like a very interesting room that you're in right now.
Well, you know, it's fun. I'm a comedian, and so during the winters, I live in Berlin, which sounds like a wild decision, but it's good for comedy. So I'm in Berlin right now at a friend's studio, and she's a hyphenate artist. So a painter, a musician, a comedian. So it's sort of an artist commune that we live in this building in Berlin.
Gotcha. There's some interesting things there on your left.
Yeah, you know, I'm just oh, Jesus. She's also a dominatrix. I didn't know those were there.
We're not editing any of this. This is a first as well. So thank you.
That's great. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. That's hilarious. Tamer,
the most Berlin thing.
Yeah, exactly. Tamer, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about you?
Okay, so my name's Tamer Kattan. I'm a comedian. I'm 51. I was living in New York during the pandemic, and a very wild experience. I'm a traveler. I've been a traveler my whole life, so the pandemic was extra suffocating for me. Yeah. And I was meant to be in Spain, so I found this feature on a dating app called Bumble where you could use a thing called Passport, and I put myself in Spain, and because that's where I was meant to be if there wasn't a pandemic. And I met a woman, we fell in love, and during the summer, because I already had COVID and recovered, I flew out to meet her, and they wouldn't let me in. And in Spain, they stopped me and they put me in jail and made me spend the night in prison in Spain and sent me back to America. And then I started doing research about how to get to Europe, how we could be together. We ended up meeting in Gibraltar, and I asked her to marry me the first day we met. And then we got married and moved to Spain. And then a few months later, I made money from selling an animated series. And we're like, what do we do? And that's when we found Portugal.
Wow.
Research and decided to come to Portugal.
Is she Spanish?
No, she's actually a Swedish woman.
Oh my goodness.
Who hates the cold weather. And so she was living in Spain for almost 7 years when we first met.
Oh my goodness. So, I mean, your family couldn't be any more multicultural. Now you've just added another dimension to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Okay, so that's funny. You're on Portugal, The Simple Life podcast, and if you've heard any of the previous episodes, you rip Spain a lot, and now I've got even more ammunition to rip them even more. You imprisoned one of our guests. You know, like, no, come on, this is not how it works.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, Tamer, maybe you can sort of just give us a bit of your background. You've got a super interesting family background, which, if you know anything about the history of Portugal, works perfectly. Yeah. Because Portugal is just this massive mixture of cultures and people historically. But just tell us a little bit about that.
So I was born in Cairo, in Egypt, to a very unusual set of people. My dad is Muslim, but my grandmother, his mom, is Greek. She's Greek Orthodox, but he had a Muslim father. So my dad grew up Muslim in Cairo, but the part of Egypt they're from is from Alexandria, and a mashup between Greek and Egyptian culture. And my grandmother was from there.
Amazing.
and my grandfather was from Cairo. The two of them got married, made my dad, who ended up falling in love with a woman whose family was half Coptic Orthodox, which is Christian in Egypt, and then the other half is Jewish from the North Africa. So my parents were this crazy mashup: Muslim dad, Jewish mom, and according to each religion, it's like I'm not supposed to exist, right? Because in Judaism, if your mom's a Jew, you're supposed to be a Jew. But in Islam, if your dad's a Muslim, you should be a Muslim. So I was a human loophole.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then, I mean, how did you end up in the States?
It's where we wanted to go ever since I was a kid. It's one of those things that where one of my parents' friends moved to California, and they'd write them and tell them how great it was. So back then, I think everybody in Egypt really thought that's the place to be, that's the place to go. But it was a very difficult process. So my dad had actually probably given up on the process several times, but it was the strength of my mom and the endurance and the tough skin of my mom that made them stick it out. And it took several years, but we ended up getting green cards to get to the States.
Well, how old were you when that happened?
7 years old.
7.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you remember
Oh, yeah,
moving?
Absolutely. But it's a strange thing. I don't remember myself as a younger version of who I am now. I remember myself when I used to be that Arab guy. I mean, I'm still Arab, but obviously I'm a different kind of Arab now. It was just it's such a big thing to leave that early, because you don't just change your hardware, you change your software too a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Okay. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about Portugal. I know you've performed in Portugal, and we'll get onto some of that and the comedy scene and things like that. But how was that? So your first experience of Portugal was now when you did that transition from Spain?
Yeah.
So you had never been to Portugal before that?
No. I mean, as you can tell by the way we got married, we're impulsive people. But I mean, I think the pandemic is a funny thing. We're all in such a hurry to get out of it that I don't think we're stopping to realize how it's impacting us and how it's changing us. This whole stop and smell the roses is not something you want to do on the way out of the pandemic. You just want out. So I think it's changed me and a lot of my friends, and definitely my wife. And, for us, when we were in Barcelona and we were looking for real estate, we didn't like the laws that were in Spain, especially in regards to squatters and things like that. And we were scared because of my job. I'm on the road so often that if somebody should notice and move into our place while we were gone, we would have to do about it. Exactly. There's nothing we could do. So we knew Spain wasn't an option. And then we were attracted to Portugal because I was also attracted to the Golden Visa program, so I could bring my mom over from the States.
Gotcha.
And we ended up doing that as well. So Portugal was attractive for multiple reasons. And I visited, through YouTube videos, the whole quarantine and pandemic. And then when I went there, I fell in love with it.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed this with my work. I think what the pandemic did for people that could and that were in a position, they moved their plans forward. Yeah. Because I think everybody had, you see a lot of people who have got kind of long-term plans. Okay, one day we'll move there and then kind of the pandemic made you realize life is really short 100%. And do it now or don't, and a lot of people did, like what you said, impulsively.
Yeah. But if you think about it, if you look at the architecture that's in Lisbon, in a lot of Portugal, it's post a horrible tragedy. It was architecture that was designed post a horrible time when, it was a religious holiday in Portugal. This huge earthquake happens. The candles from the religion lit the homes on fire. So it was like, talk about confusion and fear. And then the architecture that came out was colorful and beautiful and inspiring. So it totally makes sense to me that not just rationally and logically did my left brain feel attracted to Portugal, but emotionally, like my heart and my right brain was attracted to Portugal too.
Yeah. And I mean, I know in Spain as well, it's quite complicated with property ownership because you've got this leasehold, freehold type thing where you don't actually know if you own the building, but you don't know if you own the land that the building's on. Yeah. And it's a bit of a mess, and there's a lease on it. And it's a little bit confusing, especially in a foreign country.
Definitely. definitely.
Okay, so let's. I mean, so what was your first? So then, what was your first visit to Portugal? Was it just to come and buy?
We'd met a real estate agent online
Okay.
through a tremendous amount of research. I mean, essentially, that became my project during the pandemic.
Okay.
Since, as a performer, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get on stage. I couldn't make money. So I did what I did the first quarantine, which is I put myself in the future and was living, 2 weeks ahead or 2 months ahead or whenever we were going to be able to go out of doors again. So I did quite a bit of research. I found a real estate agent. I got my NIF before I even arrived into the country. And when I came, we had plans. We stayed for 2 weeks and we arrived in Lisbon. That night we had to quarantine. That next day is when they opened. So when we were seeing homes, a lot of the homes, it was the first guests and first visitors they had in almost a year. So it was I was looking at 10 to 12 places a day, not just a home for myself, but also a home for my mom. And then with her, I just had to whittle it down to 3 choices. And when she came, thankfully, one of the 3 she fell in love with. So yeah.
Everything looked good after spending a couple of days in prison,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it made you appreciate all the little details and the differences. For sure.
That's hilarious. What were some of the things did you have any expectations coming to Portugal?
I heard a lot of things, mostly anecdotal. I heard that I knew the weather was really nice. I knew that there was a special light, which is funny because it's something you hear about often in California and Southern California. It's the edge of a continent, So I thought maybe there'd be some things that felt familiar weather-wise, and also the kindness of the people and the safety. Those are all bigger things for my wife, to be honest. I mean, coming from LA and New York, there's a certain level of crime that I've almost gone nose blind to. I don't notice it, but for my wife, she really cared about that. And I understood that, and being a newly married person, I cared about that too. So we got there and it was everything. It was really accurate to what we'd seen online, which isn't always the case.
Yeah.
Lisbon felt like meeting a girl on a dating app and then meeting her in real life and going, oh, wow, your pictures are great.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Oh, thank God it's really you.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Let's talk about the safety thing quickly, because it is something that's so super relevant for people. I mean, you've come from quite an interesting background where you were born, which these aren't the safest places in the world in terms of peace. I'm from Johannesburg, so the bar is like right down here in terms of safety. Where you lived in the US, I think maybe for your wife it's a bit different because she's from a place that was safe and turned unsafe.
Absolutely. It's still safe. I mean, the news in Sweden is pretty scary, but when you're there, it feels really safe.
Yeah.
And even in her town, Malmo, I remember the first time we were walking through the woods and I'm like, wow, this is one of the most beautiful forests I've ever seen. And she's like, Tamer, this is a park. And I'm like, oh God. It's just so beautiful. Yeah. The forests are beautiful. The people are really kind. I mean, there's that roughneck element, but I think they know, compared to how much more mature that element is in New York or, Brooklyn, places like that, it still felt safe to me.
Yeah, I know Malmo, if you speak to people from there, they worried about the drug problem, but it's only in like one part of the city.
Yeah.
Whereas I think maybe where you're from, it's like everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. Especially, I mean, you have a subway system in New York that's very classless. Yeah. I mean, I don't mean classless like negative, classless like architecturally classless. There's going to be a guy from the finance district and there's going to be a homeless person. And there's going to be, wealthy women from the Upper East Side, and there's going to be comedians who live in the Village. And we're all on this, this bloodstream that takes us up and through the heart of the city and the kidneys and all the way to the pooper in some neighborhoods.
Which is cool, but has its downfalls.
Definitely it's great for inspiration for writers, that's for sure, but it definitely has its downfalls, especially when you're married and you have people that you care about that aren't bald guys with big mustaches and tattoos.
I like your mustache. My wife has a t-shirt that says "The mustache made me do it." Maybe she was talking about you. I need to just have a word and see what's the story there.
I don't, until I know the story, I'm not going to claim responsibility.
It's all good. It's all good. I mean, what were some of the things that surprised you coming to Portugal after you come with some expectations, you have a certain idea of what it's going to be like. What surprised you about this place?
It's a funny thing because there's certain bullet points when you look at the characteristics of a city or a place that are going to be rational and some that are going to be emotional. And even though I'd heard that people were incredibly kind, when I got there, if kindness is something you feel, it's not something you read. So even though I read it, when I met them in person, I was like, wow, these people are so incredibly over the top kind. Like my mom is a fiercely independent woman, and she knows that I spend a lot of time on the road and my job is pretty intense. So she hid the fact that she had a minor surgery on her foot. And I kept calling her going, hey, why didn't you answer? There's a 4-hour block where she wasn't answering the phone. And I was like, hey, this is weird. So she finally answered and said, look, I'm admitting I lied. I had minor surgery, just outpatient stuff. And I go, who's that in the background? And it was all her neighbors were in her house, making her food, doing her laundry, like really going out of their way to take care of her because she wasn't supposed to be walking on her feet for 3 days. So I was so humbled by that. And that building now really feels like a big family, which, after you move across an entire ocean is a really wonderful feeling.
Yeah. Definitely the kindness of the people it's still, I mean, like I told you earlier, I've been here almost 14 years. It still takes me back.
Yeah.
I still get taken aback by it and blown away by how much people will do whatever they can without asking anything in return.
Yeah.
And the time that people give up for you, which is, both of us come from places where time is something that people guard. In terms of, I'll give you this much time, I'll give you an hour, I'll give you 30 minutes. The Portuguese will give you hours and that's something quite beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they've taught me everywhere I go, I feel like I learned something. Like those old cartoons where someone has stickers all over their suitcase from the places they've been. And I think that the sticker I have from Portugal says kindness on it. Like I've slowed down. Like, listen, I'm a New Yorker at heart, so I like being a fast-paced person, and my job is fast-paced, but I still took something away from Portugal where it slowed me down a little bit and it made me more appreciative. When I look at sunsets now, I don't care where I am, even if I'm in the middle of New York, I'm going to take the time to say, wow, or maybe I wouldn't have before a little bit.
Yeah. What else surprised you, Tamer?
The architecture is beautiful and wonderful. And you always hear about the older architecture with the characteristics, with all the character, the Portuguese character. But the new architecture, the modern architecture, and like some of the museums and things are really beautiful and amazing as well. The art scene is really strong. And the kind of artists that come through are like A-list artists. You worry sometimes when you move to a smaller city. Especially, Lisbon was the smallest city I've ever lived in, and that's the biggest city in Portugal. Wow. And I was worried about that, but so many wonderful artists come through, and I didn't lack in inspiration the whole time I was there. I also found that there was lots of people from lots of different places, at least in Lisbon. That was the case, and that kindness spread to them as well. Like the people who came were also really kind people and had a lot of time for you. And the nature, I mean, listen, I live in Lisbon, and one of the wonderful things is to get on the train and then go to, Sintra.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Sintra didn't even feel real to me. And I just immediately felt my heart rate slow down. It's such a beautiful place. It feels, everyone will say this, and as a writer, it bums me out that I can't think of a better metaphor, but it's fairy tale like.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful the way that they've, especially in that particular community, the way that they've merged architecture and nature. It's wonderful.
Yeah, totally. What were some of the things, I mean, just obviously, it's good that you got this close relationship with your mom, because that's very Portuguese. So it's not out of sorts,
Sure.
Like when I moved to Portugal and I met people. They were, my mom was here in Portugal when I moved.
Oh, wow.
And when I moved, I didn't live with her. And people were like, "Why aren't you living with your mother? Like, what's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
But what were some of those things for you? I mean, because you've looked online, you've made contact with realtors and stuff. You're then coming here and you're looking with, like, really seriously looking at, is this an option for me and my mom? Yeah. What were those things that kind of made you decide, yeah, this is the right place? Because it wasn't about the properties, really. It comes down to the place.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it was a little bit of a gamble, to be honest, because we came right after the pandemic happened. So I'd known I had a few friends who were Portuguese, and I really liked them as people. Anna had friends from Brazil who were living in Portugal, so she knew them as well. And they were good enough friends that we knew they were like, there's certain friends that you meet that you go, okay, these are friends, I'm going to see them once in a while. And then there's other friends that are like tent poles. They're foundational friends where you're going to build bigger and bigger friendships with them. And those are the kind of friends that we made when we first got here. It was people that were quick to say, I'm going to introduce you to other people. And they knew they could empathize with what it was like to be starting life over again. And they made efforts to help us feel at home, not just to feel like they were a friend, but to help us feel at home. And that was it's a big difference.
Yeah. Why do you think this is still a place that's relatively undiscovered? Why do you think it's still? Because it is still. I mean, it's changing, especially Lisbon with the Californian connection and everything.
Sure.
But why do you think it's still a place that people don't know that much about? I went to a property show now in Ghent, and 2 weeks before I was in Utrecht in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And the amount of Spanish people looking for Spain more than Portugal. 20-1 type of thing.
Wow, really? I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. I'll tell you, Portuguese is not easy as a language. Even though the Portuguese speak fantastic English and the Spanish don't.
Nothing.
No offense, but like just culturally, outside of Barcelona, it's you better speak Spanish, or you're gonna have a tough time. But I think Spanish is more commonly learned and taught, and you can't really ignore the power of pop culture. I saw this interesting statistic where that movie Squid Game came out on Netflix, and immediately the number one language being learned on Duolingo was Korean. It was really crazy. Even in all around the world, it became Korean. And I think Portuguese is a tough language. But I think, and I don't think people really realize that a lot of Portuguese speak English fine. But it's not easy for sure. I think that could be a thing where it could be a language barrier, especially Portuguese, European Portuguese versus Brazilian. I think now they're starting to create more Portuguese like movies and films, and people like Cristiano Ronaldo just entering the collective consciousness is a good thing. And it might we need more Ronaldos. We need more. We need a Casa de Papel like Spain has that extends beyond just a great TV show. It becomes this property and makes people curious about the country and the culture.
Yeah.
But I think that might be what's missing.
Yeah. What's it like inside a Spanish prison?
What's funny? They were so kind. They made a point of telling me, they're like, look, you didn't do anything wrong. We changed the law yesterday. And I'm like, what? Because I literally had a QR code.
That's some bad timing, man.
It was horrible. And they said, if you didn't have a layover in the UK and it was a direct flight, we would have let you in. But because you had a layover, you just can't. And the next day I woke up and they were very apologetic and said, you're not a criminal. You're welcome back in Spain. Please don't feel like you're not. Here's an attorney and here's a translator, and they're going to explain everything that's happening to you. So yeah, I mean, it was a bummer of a situation and it costly and uncomfortable and expensive. I said costly and expensive twice because that's how much it hurt. But they were kind. And I think that was the biggest difference. I think if they were jerks on top of it, it would have made it harder for me to take. But they were kind, and I understood that the world was in a confusing time and place, and no one had all the answers. Everyone was just trying their best.
Craziness. It's crazy. It's a crazy story. I love it. I mean, where are you based in you're in Lisbon, right?
Yeah, in Alfama.
In Alfama. Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So what do you want people to know about your hometown? And what do you think it's famous for?
Oh, well, I know it's famous for fado music. And
Have you been?
Huh?
Have you been?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I live above a fado house.
Oh, brilliant.
So late at night, if it's quiet, like on a weeknight, I can hear fado singers singing a cappella in our bedroom while we're like lulling us to sleep. It's almost, I'm not going to say fairy tale. Like I'm going to say it's like a scene in a movie. It's funny as an American. It's something I say often that really annoys my Swedish wife as I go, oh, it's so European. And she goes, what does that mean? I'm like, you know what I mean? Like a guy on a bicycle with a baguette in his backpack. And she's like, Sweden's Europe. We're not like that. And I'm like, no, you guys are Nordic countries or you're Scandinavia. That's different. But there's, the cobblestone roads. We've got a cathedral on one side of the street. We can hear the church bells. And on the other side, we have a church. Our building, like daily, people are stopping and taking pictures of the beautiful tiles. And I don't know, I think you alluded to this earlier, that maybe because I'm an in-betweener, and I went through this stage in my youth where I was like, am I Arab? Am I American? And I got rejected by both sides, or I never felt, 100% in. And then I realized,
was that a real thing in the States for you? Like a real struggle?
Oh, definitely.
Being that in-betweener?
Sense of identity. Yeah. And then I realized there is a thing in the middle called an in-betweener, and that's what I am. I'm half of each, and that doesn't make it any less of a thing. Yeah. And I think Alfama, you can really feel the mashup. Like I think if I was architecture, I'd be Alfama. Awesome. A little bit crazy, a little bit windy and bumpy and cobblestone streets. And you see the influence of China on the tiles, and the influence of the Middle East and the Moors in a lot of the artwork. And I just love that it's expressed through a Portuguese lens. So it's almost like if one Portuguese person did all of that, it would be after coming back from his or her travels, they would create all of this architecture and artwork in Portugal.
Yeah.
I think that's why I felt so comfortable.
Do the bells ring every hour?
I don't notice them every hour. I don't think they do, because at the top of my street is the Say. And I think the stage rings at 4 moments. But then the other church does ring every hour. But it's really nice. It's not loud. And there's also a really sweet street musician who often plays right out front of our balcony, plays fado on his guitar. And so it was like the day we bought the house, actually, he was standing out there playing fado music. And I looked at the real estate agent.
It was sold.
Did you pay for this?
Exactly. Exactly. That's the real estate agent going, this is my lucky day. I could not have paid for better publicity than this right now.
Oh, and he's made a bunch of money off me, because every time I walk past him, I give him whatever I have, because I just think it adds to the neighborhood.
I thought you were talking about the realtor.
No, one time paid her once and done. I'm like, get out of here.
The guitarist. Yeah, I mean, it is funny. There is a picturesque aspect to Portugal, Lisbon, but a lot of other places. I must tell you, the church bell thing, like I live in a little village of like, I don't know, maybe 300, 400 people.
Oh, wow.
And the bell rings every hour. And not only does it ring every hour, it'll ring the amount of times for the hour that is. So if it's 4 o'clock, it'll ring 4 times. If it's 11 o'clock at night, it'll ring 11 times. So yeah, it's just in case you don't know what time it is, they're helpful like that.
I heard the guy who invented that was, he had OCD. No, I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
But it feels like OCD. They're like 1, 2, 3.
It's just people that are so lazy in my village, they don't want to lift up their arms to look at the time, So yeah. Is there anything you want to warn people about with Portugal? Some things that they should just be aware of when they come for the first time?
Sure. I mean, look, it's it's good and bad are not things you can separate. They're just two sides of the same thing, like day and night are part of day. And I think the slower pace, while it's good for us to feel it, it's also good for other people there to feel it too. So sometimes the service is not, like, in terms of speed, is not what you'd get in like a New York or even a London or Paris. It's takes a little bit longer sometimes, but nothing's personal. Everyone's just it's a slower pace of life, so you have to deal with you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
So patience, have patience.
So where have you experienced that kind of thing? I mean, give us a time when you thought, okay, this is me being as patient as I can be.
Lawyers.
I'm not in the US anymore.
Yeah, lawyers for sure.
Lawyers
for sure. Like, you call and you email, you don't get an email back. If you call, they'll call you back right away. And so it was just a matter of culturally finding out what streets work and what streets don't. And like email, things like that, where like, I'm used to, in New York, people are just like on it. The culture is on it, but that's the same culture that also made me lose my hair, so that stress isn't great for you. But definitely, I'm not used to attorneys getting back to me 3 days later, for example, 2 days later. Like, that's a new one for me. So I had to take a breath and deal with it. And then once I understood the rhythm of the city, it was fine.
You've done a couple of shows in Lisbon. Tell us about that and how that's gone and how it started.
They've been great. Like I was performing at Lisbon Comedy Club pretty regularly. I performed at a huge music festival called No Salive. Had like 60,000 people.
Did you do Naj? Okay, wow.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. I even was on a Portuguese soap opera. I got to do a couple lines in half Portuguese and half English. A writer for the soap opera, it was called Rua das Flores, Flower Street.
Flower Road, yeah.
Yeah, and he came to a comedy show at the Lisbon Comedy Club, and he saw what I was doing, which was I would do the joke in Portuguese. Then when I'd run out, I do it half Portuguese, half English. And I created this mashup of like Portuguese, right? And so the writer of a TV show happened to be in the audience, and he came up to me and said, "Hey, I have a part for you on this TV show."
Wow.
And I was like, all right, I'm not an attractive woman, so it must be the truth. So he gave me a script, and 2 weeks later I was on the show. And it was like TV5 or something like that. It was like Portugal's biggest TV channel. It was a really cool experience.
We do a segment on the podcast every couple of months. We interview a Portuguese comedian, and the segment is it's a special series called "Are Portuguese People Funny?" And one of the things that we always ask is, are Portuguese funny? And the answers vary depending on which comedian I'm speaking to. What do you think? I mean, what do you think about the Portuguese and their sense of humor? Are they able to laugh at themselves? Do they get what you're doing? Because some of your stuff is quite brutal. Like I've seen you lay into a couple of millennials.
Yeah.
I loved it, man. That was one of the best things. Like, we were young and you were like, hey, that's like a wine looking at, I'm old.
Yeah.
Like it was saying like
it's like a bottle of grape juice looking at a bottle of wine going, ha, you're old.
It was brilliant. It was so good.
They were giving me shit for being an old guy. I'm like, how dare you?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you nailed them. They need to be whacked around, these millennials, so. But I mean, what has your experience been with Portuguese people and receiving your style, your type of humor?
Sure. Well, it's great. I mean, they've been fantastic. Here's the thing I said since the beginning. They have fado in their culture. And fado is the ability to take dark things and the saddest moments of life and turn them into entertainment in these really sad songs. And I think that's what comedy is at the end of the day. A lot of times laughter is that thing you do when you can no longer cry. And I think that's what makes some of my dark jokes sound dark, but I always, I never punch down. I'm always pretty fair with my stuff because I am sort of a bigger guy and I'm bald. And if I was in a movie, it'd be a villain, right? So I always make sure that I never go after anybody unless they came after me first. And I make sure that the amount of law that was enforced was just. So I'm delicate. I'm pretty good. I've been doing it 12 years. So I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty comfortable with knowing how to balance that act. But I think the Portuguese are wonderful. I think they're very open. They have comedy in their culture already. They have darkness in their culture already. And they understand that a joke is a joke. Yeah. So I found it to be a really positive experience.
And they've been through enough as well to know life's not that bad. Life's not that serious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it earlier, but let's talk about that little sort of middle kind of thing. I mean, I grew up in South Africa, like I was, in that sort of privileged white bracket, but we have this thing in South Africa where you have the Afrikaners who are the Afrikaans speaking the Dutch-speaking whites,
Sure.
and then you have the English, and we were kind of viewed as traitors because they would call us soties, and a soti means a salty, which means you've got one leg in the UK, one leg in South Africa, and something dangling in the salt water. So they call it a soti.
Wow. That's funny.
But I mean,
And a big compliment, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah. You know nothing about me, and you think that
All
I
the way
have
to the water?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Exactly. But anyway, I mean, South Africa, we've had our racial issues, as everybody knows, and in America, it's not too different. Right. I mean, as being someone that's kind of in the middle, how has that experience been for you in Portugal? Because it's not a factor.
Yeah, I mean, look, the problem is it's still there's always minorities and majorities though. There's always people in power kind of taking advantage of people who don't have power. And it's one of the things I've learned is that we're all the same. It's the more I travel, the more I realize that most places are disappointingly unexotic because we're all the same. I remember one time I saw the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding with a Mexican friend. And during the film, I really love film, so I never spoke during the movie, but I couldn't wait till the film ended so I could tell my Hispanic friend that my grandmother was Greek and our family was just like that. And right when the movie ended, my friend Angel turns to me, who's from Guadalajara, and he goes, "Dude, they're just like my family." And I'm like, "Yeah, because we're all the same." So now when I'm in Portugal, I kind of make a point. I don't necessarily change my material too dramatically, to be honest, because one of the advantages for American comedians is that our entertainment is omnipresent. Everyone sees it everywhere. So they've really understood most of my references. I have definitely written jokes that are specific to Portugal, and those were fun to do. And I think for them, it was really fun too, to see like a pro comic write jokes about,
the country.
About the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And how was it received?
Great. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, actually, and it was fun because I poked at them a little bit, but it was so they didn't know where I was going to go with it. Do you want to hear it? It's my favorite.
Yeah, go tell us.
So here's what I tell them. I said, when you go to Portugal, you always hear how nice the Portuguese people are, and I go, but I'm American, I'm competitive, so I wanted to do research. And when I did research, you know what I found out? They're not that nice. They're just nice in an unexpected way. Because if you travel all around Europe, the young, busy people are not nice. They don't have time for you. But the young, busy people in Portugal go out of their way to help you. And I go, but if you go back to those same cities, the old people are really nice. But the old people in Portugal are pieces of shit. And I go in the point, and they're mean. They're a little bit mean. And then I'm, of course, exaggerating. And I go, the older Portuguese people are mean, and the young people know it, but they'll never admit it because they're Catholic and they're not allowed to be mean to old people. And I go, but I don't think they really like the old people. And I think that's why they made the streets so slippery. And now the number of times I get text messages and DMs on my Instagram from Portuguese friends who are like, "Oh my God, my girlfriend just slipped on the street." And from now on, every time we slip on the street, we're going to think of you in that joke. No,
Have you slipped on the street?
Of course, like 4 times. It's crazy.
I was once carrying a whole file full of like documentation, and literally like something in a movie where the guy goes out of camera and the papers just fly up. That was exactly what happened, man. It was
violently slippery.
Yes, it's insane. It's a leveler. The streets of Lisbon make everybody the same.
Yeah.
Awesome. Tamer, you've lived in different places. You've been to different parts of the world with your work, all over the place. What do you think makes Portugal unique?
Definitely the people. I'm going to say something that the young kids say because we made fun of them earlier. So now I'm going to give them one for their side. I love this word I didn't use when I was younger, but they use it. It's got a vibe. It's there's a good energy in Portugal that not my frontal cortex, but my primal brain, that brain that taught us how to survive from dinosaurs and go, okay, this area is safe. And that's what Portugal feels like. It feels it's my instincts that told me it was a good place. It was the genuine smiles on people's faces, the pace of life. people walking and not walking past a sunset, but stopping and looking at it and appreciating it. People not just gulping their coffee, but taking their time to appreciate it, and people making eye contact when they speak to you. Like those are all things that I think we take for granted when we're going 55 miles an hour on the highway of life. But when you slow down, there's a lot of beautiful things that you can smell and touch and hear that you don't notice when you're going too fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. Amazing. And I couldn't agree with you more. Where else in the country do you want to visit? What other parts of the country would you like to see?
Everywhere. I mean, I've gone to Porto, and I just love it. I think Porto is so beautiful and charming and very different. It's funny how every place has that, like LA has San Francisco, New York has New Jersey, there's always the, London has Liverpool, this big city and second city, and there's always this competitiveness, but they're so very different. Yeah. And I love them both. And I want to explore from top to bottom of Portugal. I've been to the Algarve and I love that as well. But Porto really captured my heart. And I'm really excited to see the Silver Coast and everything else.
Come and visit. When you're next year, come visit. We'll hang out.
That's a deal.
Yeah, that'll be cool. Why do you think Portuguese people should be proud of their country?
Lots of reasons. I think, listen, I come from a country that was great. And now because of the corruption and the politics and all that stuff, we haven't been able to find our greatness again. And, they say that about business people, to be a successful businessman and fail isn't the end of the road. And if that, you hear it all the time about really successful business people who failed and then came back. And I have more respect for those people. I have more respect for a champion who lost and came back than for someone who's undefeated. You know what I mean? Like I like Muhammad Ali more than Floyd Mayweather, who was never touched. I have more respect for that. And I think Portugal is a country that was at the top of the world, and it's doing it again. It's finding its way in a modern time, and not just giving up and resting on its laurels and saying that's what we were. I love the fact that it's open to digital nomads, to the tech category. I think, no government's perfect, but I think the openness and kindness that its government is showing towards expats and immigrants is smart and simultaneously balanced, where they're also being kind to local people and making sure that they don't feel threatened.
Yeah. Tamer, quickly about food. Have you tried everything? Are there things that you've avoided? Yeah. Where are you at with the food?
The food. Look, I got to preface this by saying I am wildly spoiled in the food department.
Okay.
Middle Eastern food and Greek food and French in one family. So, I mean, I am a pothead's wet dream.
What about the Swedish food?
Swedish food is fantastic.
Yeah,
but only
meatballs?
Things. The meatballs are really great, but it's very different food for sure. Yeah. But the cold water fish, like really, really cold water, changes fish. It tastes different. And the Swedes cook it in a certain way, or sometimes don't cook it.
Or don't cook it. Don't they also like ferment it in a bucket?
Oh, that's the herring. Yeah, I don't touch that shit. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that till I'm 80. 80, I'll try it.
When you're ready to die.
When I have 3 taste buds left.
Yeah.
Give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Portuguese food is lovely. I have my favorite places. It's definitely great. The desserts, man, my first 3 months, I was eating way too much. And the pastel de nata, of course, is great. And the fish is fantastic. It's got a lot of down home feel good, rice and bean stews in ceramic pots. That's the stuff I really, really dig.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. All right, Tamer, I could speak to you forever about these things. What's one thing that you would like people to remember and take away from our conversation? Just one thing.
Oh man, enjoy life. If there's anything that I've learned from this pandemic and from the move to Portugal, I feel like the pandemic was an injury and Portugal was the remedy, in the sense that the pandemic forced me to slow down, and Portugal showed me that that was a good thing. And I think that it is a good thing. It's a positive thing. I think the Portuguese have it right about slowing down and appreciating family, appreciating life, appreciating nature. Those are all very healing things, especially after what we've come out of.
Yeah.
I think coming out of New York, sometimes you forget to take care of your insides. You're always just in a mad dash because it's so competitive. And Portugal reminded me to take care of my insides too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. How can people follow you online? Stay in touch, be kept up to date with your next shows and things like that.
Instagram is a fantastic place. It's Tamer Kat, so it's TamerKat, and that's the most real-time stuff. And I'm constantly on the road. I'm on the road like every month, so I'm in a different country, different city. I'm getting such an education. It's great.
For sure, we'll have listeners in a city where you're coming to, I'm sure. So
yeah, that'd be awesome.
We'll put links in the show notes, and people can come and see you live.
Cool.
And let's get together. Let's get together when you're next in Portugal, Tam.
That's a deal. Absolutely. We
awesome.
will. Okay.
A question that we ask all of our guests, Tamer. Portugal, the simple life. Why?
It's funny. I heard this great quote that said, really good design is not knowing when to stop adding. It's knowing when you can stop removing. That's when you have great design, when there's nothing added that doesn't need to be there. And I feel that's the simplicity of Portugal. It's not simple as in basic. It's simple as in everything you need, and no excess. It's the way a really good traveler packs in a small little bag that you can carry with you. And that's what I like about Portugal. It's everything that I need. And the only thing I've ever missed in Portugal might be some of the things that I want, but never anything that I needed.
Awesome. Yeah. Well put. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love this. Thanks for being on the podcast, Tamer.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It was really nice to finally meet.
Likewise. And I'm going to let you call it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I get to say, this is so exciting. I love saying this. It's a wrap.
So thank you once again to Tamer, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal The Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. And as we say in Portugal, te próxima. Welcome to The Simple Life.